Frost-tipped branches glistened in the waning sunlight, crisscrossing over a beaten path. The air was brittle and dry, with snow dusting the ground, the edges of brown leaves peeking through. A little girl crouched on the hardened ground, unconcerned by the deepening cold. Her home sat comfortably within her eyesight, and nearby a kettle pot hung over a modest campfire, orange flames flickering against copper. The little girl's breath came out in puffs, floating up a short way before fading. The worn jacket wrapped around her petite body hardly shielded her against the cold, but her childlike demeanor would not be smothered by unpleasant weather. She didn't have many friends to play with, few lived or even ventured near the edge of the forest, but she was content with only herself and the wild fantasies of her imagination. More often than not, the little girl wasn't completely alone. She would regularly see a stray mutt following her as she capered around. He was a pitiful sort of dog, dirty and ragged, but she didn't mind his company. The little girl would feed him whenever she had food on hand, while the mutt would pant along softly, watching her with great interest and even adding the occasional whine to her fantastical stories. She spotted him without effort, being used to all his coming and going. She looked up from her spot on the ground and smiled delightfully, hands shivering despite the warmth of her breath. But to her immense disappointment, the mutt offered her no greeting, instead slinking off into the woods with a low groan. It sounded nothing at all like the gentle noises he usually made. She longed to chase after him, but an abrupt gust of wind blew the kettle off its hook, sending sparks and ashes into the air as it landed in a circle of burnt wood.
Her small body shivered and vainly grasped the thin coat tighter. A murmur rose from the darkness of the woods, like raspy tones whispering into her ear. Her mother's voice sounded, piercing through her quiet solace and beckoning her home for supper. The voices and lights from her home were a beacon as the little girl began to obey, filled with the promise of a warm meal with her family. She took only 3 steps towards her home, stopping next to the hearth as if some obscure force prevented her from continuing. Uncanny wind rustled again through the trees, growing in fervor and whistling like the wail of a screaming siren. Foliage of stomachs waved their sour red cones through the air as if inviting her back. She sat dubiously on the stones next to the fire pit, staring down as the copper kettle burned in its grave of ashes. An abnormal hiss caught the little girl's attention. Though quiet, it blended with the wind like dying laughter. She listened for it again, trying to discern the unnerving sound, all the while trembling in fear. A tall, emancipated body emerged from the shadows of the woods. The little girl stayed unmoving as the beast tilted its mangled head, stalking her through dark, dreary eyes. Its body was covered in frost, clumped together like icicles. Horrible claws extended from its long, distorted arms, and its lipless mouth was filled with jagged teeth, all tinted in red. Freezing coldness filled the air around her, biting at her skin. Her leather shoes were no longer enough as the unnatural chill licked the soles of her feet.
With another hiss-like breath, the thing dragged itself towards her, reaching out a gnarled limb in the hopes that it might ensnare her. Her throat closed at the thought of the horrible beast painting its teeth a brighter coat of red. In the despairing cold, she felt her heartbeat quicken, a grim reminder of the possibility that it wouldn't beat for much longer. Then the little girl noticed something, hidden deep within its menacing features and bottomless maw: sadness. To the icy heart of the beast, the little girl saw anguish, despair. A pang of sympathy pulsed through her own warm heart. Was this thing much different from the stray she fed with her very own hands, cursed to wander the land, seeking to fulfill its voracious appetite? She uselessly held out a hand in an attempt to stop it, gasping when the frozen body bristled against her bare skin. Her other hand swept down into the fire pit and caught hold of the kettle's handle as monstrous claws closed around her body. She was roughly lifted off the ground, searing copper in hand that contrasted with the burning frost of the creature. There was no time to attempt to cry. The little girl's hands clung to the beast's bristling fur as she was whisked away at a frightening speed. The wind howled and whipped around her harshly. Bushes were left stripped of their remaining leaves as they passed. She scarcely managed to keep her grip on the handle.
It was meant to be hopeless. The beast would devour her, and she would be no more. She knew this, yet her compassion would not let her forget what she saw, buried beneath frozen layers of bile and glut. The little girl was determined to save the miserable thing. Her warm hands bore into the icy creature, shoveling themselves full of snow. She thawed the beast's wintry armor into a tiny gorge and forced the kettle's boiling contents straight to its frozen core. There was a low groan as the beast darkened. It began to shrink as the heat melted its monstrosity away. Frost softened into water, spilling droplets onto the ground as the creature persisted running through the night. All the while, the little girl waited. The creature slowed at last. Darkness turned to day, and morning's first rays broke the cold earth. Remaining bits of frost were limited to shadows. The little girl lay still, cold and tired, though wrapped safely in the arms of a man who carried her.